This is a very interesting time, guys. We have emergency authorization of one COVID-19 vaccine, well, actually a vaccine for SARS-CoV-2, and the second one is on the horizon. So the first winner to the vaccine, I guess, marathon was the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. And the second one that's, I'm sure, going to be emergency authorized is the Moderna vaccine. And those are both mRNA vaccines, which we will talk about in another discussion. I think today, the most important thing to talk about is the apprehension in the African-American community and probably a lot of minorities about getting the vaccine. And despite what you believe, and I'm saying you meaning whether you're a person of color or a person who's not of color, this is based on a real thing. And I'm sure some of you have heard mentioned and little, mumblings about the Tuskegee Experiment. And so we're going to essentially kind of talk to you about what happened, give you some of the facts and the fallout and why it is that people are kind of correlating what's going on today with the Tuskegee Experiment.
Right. I think to clear the air a little bit, I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
And because everybody, we read everybody's Instagram posts.
Yeah.
So, especially all the naysayers about the vaccine, no matter what, you're going to have the antagonists.
Yeah.
Right. So were there any cuts or any corners cut on making this new vaccine? And why did it develop so fast? That's the question I've been asked at least 10 times in my DMs.
Well, I think what is happening this time that's really, really different in comparison to what's happened in the past when it comes to vaccines. Typically, there's two ways that we've been using vaccines. We've developed vaccines. Two ways. One, a live vaccine, meaning that you get a little bit of the virus that's actually a live vaccine. That's some of the live virus, and you either for instance, the flu vaccine. That's a perfect example because there's two different types. There's a live vaccine and a kill vaccine. And the live vaccine, you actually get a little bit of the live virus, and that's the intranasal one. And the kill vaccine, you actually get a shot. What's different is normally when that vaccine is made, what actually happens is that vaccine is put into, like, for instance, for the flu vaccine, a hen egg, and then it's developed, and then you have to then extract that vaccine and purify, make sure everything's fine, and then kind of, create the vaccine itself. And so that process takes a long, long time. In this type of vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, you're actually getting kind of an immune response without any of the actual the actual virus being put into you. And so what essentially happens is there is a way of creating a smartness in your body by the mRNA. And so that mRNA, so there's two different types that they've been talking about. Both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, both are mRNA virus vaccines, but another type that was kind of in the running was a DNA vaccine. But right now, let's just talk about the mRNA. So 2 doses. The first time you're essentially getting exposure to what's called a spike protein. And that spike protein comes into your body and it creates like this, oh, something's going on here. If I see that foreign thing, then I'm going to attack it. Again, not the actual coronavirus or SARS-CoV-2. It's just an analogy, something similar to that. And so when that vaccine is injected into you, you're getting kind of like the blueprint of what would happen if you were exposed to the actual virus.
But no actual virus.
No actual virus at all is injected into you.
It's almost like a trick.
And so it's just a way of making your immune system see essentially kind of what the composition is of SARS-CoV-2 before you actually get exposed to it. But again, I want to talk about that a whole nother time. Not going to talk about that today because you probably can watch a billion, trillion lectures on that. But the important thing is why it is that African Americans in particular are nervous about getting the vaccine. So let's talk about what the Tuskegee Experiment. Had you heard about that before you went to medical school?
I may have heard somebody mention it, but I didn't learn of it in medical school. I learned of it,
Didn't learn about it in medical school?
I learned of it actually in college, when I was, still like that.
All our woke friends.
Yeah, exactly. All our work friends back in college. And
I went to an HBCU, so of course we heard about these kind of things around the yard at Xavier University, New Orleans. Shameless plug, sorry.
But we did. We learned about the Tuskegee Experiment, and we just, in a nutshell, you're like, oh, black men were given syphilis, so they had syphilis, and they couldn't be treated. They wouldn't be treated, and it was documented that they couldn't even go out of state and get treated. Even some of the black men that knew that something was going on, and the doctors just wouldn't treat them.
Okay,
It's
so
so much deeper than that.
some of what he said was true.
No, I'm saying this is what we knew.
This is what we heard. But we've heard all these deviations.
But we
of
know
what
different.
happened.
We know different.
So what actually happened? True. Tuskegee University. Tuskegee University is in Alabama, right? Historically black college, medical school, dental school, one of the best veterinary schools in the world.
Yeah.
So Tuskegee, okay, real place, not a myth. United States Public Health Service Corps, not a myth, a real organization. The people who are in the United States Public Health Service Corps wear the same uniform that Navy people wear. And the leader is the Surgeon General. Interesting. So,
and CDC exists. CDC.
Yeah. So
exists.
All these kind of places was things you've heard about. So what happened was, in the nation, period, syphilis was running rampant. It was actually a big deal. It's an STD, and it's actually now it's made a comeback. So syphilis is a sexually transmitted disease that is that's transmitted via
sexual intercourse.
Yeah, but it's a spirochete. It's a bacteria. And so what happens is there are different types of syphilis. And a lot of times, when you come into the doctor and you get tested for it, we're like, oh, super easy. We'll give you some penicillin. We can treat that. And literally, it kills it. It's real easy. And penicillin is super, super cheap, right? Shot of penicillin, we're good. What happened was in 1932.
Before the invention of penicillin, right?
I think it was somewhere before it became like the standard of care. There was some question. I think that was penicillin was actually invented in 1928 or discovered or something, but before, it takes a while.
It became popular right around World War II.
Yes, exactly. And so what happened was in 1932, there was this organization that actually, what was the name of that organization? I want to say, who was it? Doesn't matter. But this organization, I think Rosenwald Foundation or something like that, the guy who was the CEO at the time of Sears. Okay. And so he had a foundation kind of very much like the Gates Foundation and was doing a lot of funding of research, right? But then, this was 1932. Of course, we know that's right around the Great Depression. And so when this research was funded, the initial idea was that we're going to first figure out kind of what's going on with syphilis in the world, how is it diagnosed? And then the second part was going to be after we figure out what it is, how it works, we're going to treat people, right? And then hopefully eradicate it, get rid of it. The second part really never happened, the treatment and eradication, because that foundation went under because the funding went away, right? Enter Tuskegee. So at this point, the United States Public Health Service Corps was involved, but there was a doctor who then decided in the Public Health Service Corps that instead of us doing the second part of this treatment part, Black men are dumb, or their IQ is low, their bodies are such that they really are they have this voracious sexual appetite, but they also don't have the brain power, the mental capacity. And so I think what's going to happen is that syphilis is not going to affect Black people the same way it affects white people. So let's test and see what happens in Black people. I think it's going to affect their hearts, but it's probably not going to affect their brains and the neurological system, which is exactly what it does in all people. But that was the thought.
And this was a doctor in the Public Health Service Corps.
And so, the government was funding this study. And so what ended up happening was in this county in Alabama, there was a large percentage of Black men who had syphilis. And they thought, because they were sharecroppers, they were poor, they didn't have any money, they thought they were coming to be treated for bad blood, right? Which could be anemia, which could be, including syphilis. But they really, like kind of right now, because of the internet and everything, what diseases are.
Right.
They didn't know that. They just thought they were sick and I don't know what's wrong with me, but these good doctors are going to take care of me. And that was what was promised to them.
And you got to remember, the first stage of syphilis is usually an ulcer or canker sore in the genital region. So, and it literally, guys, looks like somebody took a hot scoop and scoops out a piece of your skin.
Right.
So it's undeniable that you have something wrong with you.
But the killer was, not only was this experiment happening right underneath the nose of the United States government was funding it and running this study, and Tuskegee, of course, was complicit. It was happening at Tuskegee. But they did it, again, they thought they were going to have access to more research dollars. It was going to kind of make them a big name like Yale in the world of research. They were going to be able to get government dollars. So they thought they were doing something that was going to lead to them becoming more prestigious. So what ended up happening was they used their lies to encourage Black people to come, Black men, to come in and they were getting spinal taps. They were getting their blood drawn all the time, but they were getting zero treatment. There was no treatment whatsoever. Actually, the goal of the study was just to see how bad syphilis was going to get. And then after they died, because they also promised them free burial, after they died, they wanted to do an autopsy so they could see how it affected their brains and their bodies and all the organs. They wanted to see how bad it could actually get. There was no intention to treat these people.
At all.
At all. Our fathers, our brothers, our uncles. And not only that, when you go home and you sleep with your wife or your girlfriend and she gets pregnant and then you have a baby, that baby gets congenital syphilis. So these are all things that happened that was funded by the government. But peep game, this is where it gets really bad. At this point, syphilis was absolutely, they figured out that penicillin treats syphilis with no problem.
Right. That it cured it completely.
Enter another organization that's a government organization, the military. So, of course, during this time period, like you said, the war, they started drafting people. And when you do that, you get a physical. So when the men would go and get drafted, then of course they would be discovered to have syphilis and they would get treated. Right. So then the Public Health Service Corps contacted the county health department. They contacted the military. They said, don't any of these men who are in this study, don't send them a draft letter.
Don't draft them.
Because we don't want them to get treated. We want to see them die from syphilis. We want to see how bad it gets. We want them to stay in this study. How nefarious is that? How bad is that?
And how bad is it that the government obliged?
Not several organizations.
Obliged.
Continuously.
And they literally would not let these men even get drafted.
That's crazy. Just because they didn't want them to get treated.
Especially like for Vietnam War, Black men were so happy with the Vietnam War that they would not get drafted.
So how long did this study go on? 40 years. 40 years. 40.
It didn't end until 1972.
A whistleblower.
1972.
1972. So it started in 1932 and finished in 1972. Only because a whistleblower, a guy who was previously in the United States Public Health Service Corps, contacted someone in the media and said, "Hey, I think it was the Associated Press."
Star.
Well, that's what was published. But and they wrote this article and said, "How terrible is this? This is completely and totally fucked up." Terrible. And so only then was there public outcry that made them get rid of the study. But there was no interest at all in doing right by these men. And they literally watched people suffer and die.
And syphilis is a terrible disease.
And kids are born with
congenital syphilis, blindness. But let me tell you guys, so
curiosity. They just wanted to see what would happen.
It's 3 stages to syphilis.
Doctors.
Right?
Yeah.
3 stages.
Yeah, but they just wanted to see what would happen. So now let's fast forward.
Which is called euthanasia?
Yeah.
It's called euthanasia.
So now, why is this important? As a result of all these things that happened, right? There are certain rules that are in place, like the Belmont Report, right? And there are certain rules that are strict governing bodies that maintain how it is that research can be conducted, right? So in order for, first and foremost, you can't even do research on certain what's called vulnerable groups of people. The reason that these farmers even participated, these sharecroppers, they were so poor they didn't even have access to medical care.
Right.
So free medical care, they were getting free meals, they were getting transportation to come in for the treatments, which was again painful spinal taps, drawing their blood. And the reason they were drawing their blood, you remember why they were drawing their blood?
I knew they were doing the spinal taps to check the meningeal fluid to see if the syphilis is in their brain and then they're going up to their brain.
Let me tell you how dirty they were. They were drawing their blood all the time so they could have a constant amount of they wanted to have research material, because when you actually experiment on those spirochetes, the actual bacteria that's in the blood that causes syphilis, it is really easy to kill. And so they said, you know what? Instead of us having to like create it in the lab or something, we'll just keep getting it from people. And so again, if you cure them, then you don't have this bacteria living. Right. So they wanted to have basically a living petri dish, so they could come back at any time and get more research material on the the Treponema pallidum, which is the spirochete, the bacteria that causes it. That's why they were so that's absolutely cruel. But now we can't even do research on people who are super poor, right? People who are living in prisoners, homeless people, children, disabled, mentally challenged, people who can't provide what's called consent. And informed consent means you have to, one, know your diagnosis. They were never told that they had syphilis.
Right.
Can you imagine?
There has to be informed consent with any research now.
And then also the doctors have to have a body that governs them. So you can't just say, I'm going to do research. Someone has to be independent of your, someone who's not involved in your research has to supersede that and say, you know what, this is good, this is okay. And they basically have to approve it. And if you don't have that, then again, that's not allowed. You also have to have what's called beneficence, which means that there has to be some benefit that can be shown that's going to be to the people who participate in the study, right? And then I guess finally, the only thing that I would say, if we can't convince people today that those types of studies honestly aren't going on anymore,
right?
Then that again will be the fear that people are going to always be living with.
Yeah, it will continue to, contribute to the apprehension that people have as far as any type of studies or medical care.
And as a Black man, how does that even make you feel? Like, take your doctor hat off and put on, like, just as a Black man in America.
I mean, to see that was going on,
Could have been your dad.
Yeah, when I was born, that the study was still ongoing and going on. And even the Black males that knew something was wrong with them and tried to seek alternate care, alternate treatment, and they were still blocked. I think that's insane. Mm-hmm. That's totally insane. Could you imagine, like, your name is on a list where you cannot get treated at any health department in the surrounding states around Mississippi?
And that's illegal. That's actually illegal. It's illegal for us to do those things. Yeah. And all those rules are now in place, that justice and beneficence and, not violating the law and informed consent, those are now things that are in place. And so now when you kind of watch what's happening with this COVID vaccine trial and kind of the development of the COVID vaccine, and you think about what happened with the Tuskegee experiments, the Tuskegee, it was actually called, what was the formal name of that study? I think it was called let me look it up. The Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male, the United States Public Health Service Corps, Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. And it was so bad that in 1997, Bill Clinton apologized to, the survivors and their families. And ultimately, they did get a little bit of money. How much money per person? I think $40,000 per person. But people died. I mean, it's not even nearly enough.
It's not even.
But that didn't happen. That didn't happen this time. This is not what happened with the COVID vaccine trial. People, volunteers, they knew exactly what they were getting into, and they requested to participate. They fully knew that they were getting this was a vaccine trial to protect them against SARS-CoV-2, and so all those elements that happened in the Tuskegee experiment is not actually happening today. Everyone who's going to get the vaccine is going to opt to get the vaccine. Even if your organization tells you that you should be immunized, you have a choice. You never have to get anything put in your body.
Correct.
Period. You don't have to, and if you have cancer, you don't have to get chemotherapy. You don't have to have surgery. You don't have to have radiation. Every year, for instance, our facilities want us to get a flu shot, but there is a waiver that you can sign. And if you don't want the flu shot, then you just have to wear a mask all the time. Well, now we're wearing a mask all the time. So people have the option, right? To get it. Yeah. I mean, so I just wanted people to kind of understand why and what the Tuskegee experiment is. It's not a myth. It really happened. People were not injected with syphilis. They just were allowed to basically live their life with a very curable disease and not get treatment for it, just so for grins and giggles, so for curiosity purposes, to figure out what it is, how bad it was going to get for people, and if you died, what post-mortem your brain and your body would look like. Right. And that's just cruel. That's cruel.
Give me my dermatology book for 1 second.
Cruel.
Very interesting. We have a very popular dermatology book that most all medical students bought. And I went through this book, and it's amazing that the only pictures with African Americans in it were people with syphilis. Isn't that amazing?
Crazy.
Like, I mean, like, except
and look
for
how thick this book is.
It's a thick book.
Look at this book.
All these pictures. There were no pictures with African Americans and all the common skin diseases, but when you came to syphilis, there was. Now, this is.
I'm
not going to gross them out. I'm going to show you a chart. I'm going to show you a chart right there. You see that chart right there? That chart says the course of disease and blood tests. And you see how many years it says it went on? 30 years, right there where my thumb is. So it shows you all the stages of syphilis. Primary, secondary, earlier, late. Then it says when the heart problems start happening, when the central nervous system problems start happening. This went on for 30 years, and this was on Black men.
And all you have to do is just give them a shot. Just one shot, one time. We don't always have people come back. We just give them the shot, and we're like, hey, you've been cured. That's how good.
Simple it is to cure.
So cheap. Yeah. Literally cents. Cost cents. So acknowledging that this happened to us as Black people that's just really all that people are asking for. Make your own decision, do your research. The data is new about SARS-CoV-2. This vaccine data is new, but mRNA research has been happening for a long time, and they've been the whole idea of developing an mRNA vaccine has been on the horizon for literally over a decade. So this isn't new per se. It's just when they said, when President Trump said Operation Warp Speed, the old way of doing the vaccines, where you actually have to, harvest the virus in an animal and then, kill that animal and then take that virus out and then purify it and then do all this. That takes so long. Mm-hmm. We didn't have time to do it that way.
We know the technology advances. I mean, so when everybody's saying they rushed and made this, they haven't made a cure for HIV. HIV is the most complicated virus ever.
And this still isn't a cure. This is not a cure. This is a vaccine. It's a vaccine, and they've been working on it
for a while.
But it's all about funding too. There has to be when you talk about eradicating viruses and you talk about interest in research. If no one cares, if there's no interest in it, then no one's going to buy it. They're not going to invest in your research project. There has been nothing but interest in creating a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. So that's why this is happening, I'm air quoting so fast. There's so much more money poured into this whole project.
Yeah. I mean, it's so basically there's been no sacrifice. There's been no sacrifice on the, the integrity of science with this, because mRNA has been around for a while. It pioneered. It's brilliant. The actual aspect of mRNA is brilliant.
And we're gonna talk about that in a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, we're gonna do a whole nother story because we gotta talk about the phase. This is phase 3 of the trial, and for it to have the effectiveness that it has shown is pretty good, data to back it up right now. And you gotta remember, it's like Moderna's had 30,000 people in the trial,
and Pfizer
these are extremely large trials, and Pfizer 44,000. But let's come back and talk about.
We will, for sure.
mRNA.
And all you listening, unless you are a healthcare provider or a elderly person who is in a nursing home, you probably aren't going to be getting the vaccine anytime soon anyway. But I just want to start kind of creating your ability to do some, looking up stuff yourself and making your own decision. But all those things, not knowing what's going on, not being aware, kind of purposely just using you as a petri dish. This is not happening right now. Matter of fact, all this conversation about it never happened in the Tuskegee Experiment. There was no conversation because no one even knew what was going on except the researchers who were purposely being cruel. So you never have to participate. And I guarantee you never have to get a vaccine.
I guarantee you there are no nanotechnology in a vial that we are having nurses pull out a certain amount of vaccine and inject it in you. There's no way you
That's
can
not gonna
suck up
happen to
some
you.
nanotechnology or nanobites or whatever people are saying traces. It's impossible.
There's no such thing as a mandatory. Who is they? There is no mandatory vaccine. I'm a doctor. I was in the military. There's no mandatory anything. You can always waive. You can always opt out of treatment. You can always choose to not get a vaccine. There's always a form that you can sign, and there's always a secondary way of doing it. Again, with the flu vaccine, mandatory just means that we want you guys to do this, right? We require this. However, if you say, no, I don't want this in my body, we are humans. You can't do putting anything into your body is called invasive. You have to get, again, informed consent. When you go take your kids to the pediatrician, they don't just immunize your children. You have to consent to that.
Right.
So no one can ever force you or arrest you and make you get anything. So just that part of it, that's not going. And who is they? Do you think you're going to get arrested? So those are things that, again, just don't get distracted on those things, right? Just only focus on kind of what's going on right now. Make the decision or don't make the decision about getting the vaccine.
Yeah.
But no one's going to hold you down and make you get anything. And this is very different. You can choose to participate or you can choose not to.
And remember, Tuskegee Experiment, they didn't even know what was going on. They did not choose to participate. So we thank you guys for joining us today.
And read up on it.
Read up on it.
It's a black eye on the stain of American history.
Yeah.
Good Lord. It's awful. It's awful what humans are capable of doing. And, Black people, good Lord, we got a lot to get over. And it's, for some of us, we ain't never gonna get over it. But it's not based on something. And that's really all we wanted to talk about today. So do your research.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining us. Have a good one. And we are done.